This week, the show isn't about a celebrity or a big automotive name. We're talking to our customers, three car guys from the local scene with some cool cars and some great stories.
It was a burnout monster. 16, 17-year-old kid at the car little brake stand. I went through a few pairs of tires.
Stopping, it's the worst part. In the eighth, I'm going over 100. There's been a couple times where I was like, oh boy,
It's still a huge adrenaline rush. It's really surprising. Like, you catch people off guard.
Every year, Speedway Motors hosts Customer Appreciation Week to thank our customers for building, driving, and chasing their passion for cars. This year, we're giving away a spot on our catalog cover, and this episode will feature a few of our customers who have already been there. Mike Earley, Jason Holland, and Nick Hazing are three lifelong car guys who do their own wrenching at home, drive their projects like they know how to fix them, and have cars that have been featured in our catalog. Mike's up first, and he has a cool 69 Chevelle with a supercharged LS. Then, we'll hear from Nick and Jason about their pair of wicked Model A hot rods that they've driven all over the country. Today, we're telling your stories. Your Chevelle is on the cover of our new muscle car catalog, but the story of you and that Chevelle goes back to even before you had the car. How did that whole Chevelle thing start for you?
I kind of grew up in a car family. My dad was into 57 Chevys, and he had a 66 Chevelle. So, there was always muscle cars and kind of hot rod cars around the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of was always into cars and knew I wanted to do something with cars, but didn't really know what. It was always Chevelles kind of, I guess. And so we were at a Americruise type show. Well, I was probably, I don't know how old I was, 7, 10 years old, something like that. We were just standing on the side of the road in this 71 Chevelle, 71 or 72, I don't even remember, but it was yellow, black racing stripes, sitting on some drag lights and just gnarly cam, open exhaust, shaking the ground. Just, you could feel it in your chest. And I reached over to one of my dad's buddies, Rick, and tugged on his shirt. And I was like, what is that thing? That is the coolest car I've ever seen. What is that? And he looked up kind of nonchalantly and was like, I don't know. It looks like a 70, 71 or 70, 72 Chevelle, something like that. And I go, that's what I want. I want that. I don't know how I'm going to get it, but I want to have that.
And that was the moment that sort of set it all in motion, right?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, at that point I was hooked. I was as I grew up helping my dad with cars a little bit and stuff like that, probably from the age of 14 or so up, just looking at the Thrifty Nickel and the one ads, trying to find that Chevelle, the one.
You knew that you wanted a Chevelle. How many did you look at before you found the one that you ended up getting?
I would bet I probably looked at about 7 of them or so, and they were all just ugly green vinyl top, green interior, and they all were just roached, needing full restorations. Most of them had motor. If they had a motor, it didn't run and it hadn't ran for years. So there's just a lot of undesirable cars for a 15, 16-year-old kid to have at that time. Looking through the one ads and scouring them, and just finally coming across one that was in just west of Beatrice. And my dad just happened to be going down that way to pick up some products for work. And he agreed to go take a picture, go look at it. And he had a disposable camera and took some pictures of it. And when he got home that night, I rushed down to the Walmart and had them developed. And just inside Walmart, looking at the pictures, I was like, "Oh my God, this is not a green on green Chevelle. This thing looks awesome." And it was a fairly decent car. It had been halfway restored in the 80s, and then driven on gravel for, God knows how long. So
yeah. So talk about making the deal to get it.
Yeah, after looking at those pictures, I called him back and said, "Hey, I'm pretty interested in this. I want to go get it." And was able to talk my mom into taking me down there, going down there with me to pick it up. I think the following weekend, and we went down there and took it for a test drive and jumped out on the highway and seen if it would do a brake stand. And
That was the first thing you did with it?
Yeah, I don't. Every time I buy a car, I tend to do something I shouldn't do on a test drive. But yeah, I did a brake stand on the highway. We took it out and cruised it for a little bit and came back and made the deal and drove it home. And drove it probably for, almost, not quite a year, about 9 months, 8, 9 months, before I got the crazy idea that I was going to tear it down and restore it before I graduated in 4 months.
So you were a pretty young kid with a muscle car, your dream muscle car. Surely there were some misadventures along the way.
Oh no, I was a good kid and obeyed all the traffic laws and didn't do anything inappropriate. Yeah, it was a burnout monster. I mean, 16, 17-year-old kid with a car that'll do a brake stand. I went through a few pairs of tires.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my first provisional operator's permit violation trying to race one of my buddies on North 70th Street. And it was just a fun driver to beat on, driving it, and I drove it year round. Just had a lot of fun with it.
And so what made you decide that you were going to restore it while you were still in high school?
I honestly don't know. I didn't know how much work it took. I think you watch some of the TV shows and every Sunday morning watching the hot rod shows and all that stuff, and thinking that it looked like it was pretty easy for those guys to do. And so
Right.
I've always had the mentality just to jump in and do it and find out what happens. So I decided that I was going to start tearing into it. And so me and a buddy blew it all apart. And then one of my dad's friend's sons just graduated auto body school at SEC. So he agreed to kind of come help me out and, show me the ropes and get it going that way. So
Mm-hmm.
he shows up one night and cut the passenger side quarter panel out. And a couple nights later, he shows up and he starts rough cutting the driver's side quarter out while I'm
Mhm.
drilling the spot welds on the passenger side. And we get done for the night, and I never heard from him again. He didn't answer my phone calls. Actually, I haven't talked to him since that night, actually, and that was
Wow.
what, in 2000, probably, 2001. So I had a pile of parts and I had to figure out what to do with it because it was completely worthless. Well, it wasn't completely worthless, but compared to what it was, it's completely worthless. So I had to figure out what to do. So
And did you have a welder and the tools that you needed?
My dad had a little Miller Cricket flux core welder. And actually that's still the same welder that I use today. So it's by no means a good welder, but it was able to booger some metal together.
Mm-hmm.
Ordering parts and stuff, or just getting spot weld drill bits and things like that. To answer the question, no, I didn't have any of the tools I needed really, but the basic stuff, welders and drills and hammers and things like that.
You feel like you're in over your head, right?
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I don't know. I have a weird mentality where I'm not afraid to jump in and do stuff. So I had no choice but to figure it out, I guess, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little nerve wracking, for the first couple of weeks when I kept trying to call him and call him and call him and he wouldn't answer. And it was like, well, I kind of got a basic idea. He kind of showed me a basic idea of what to do. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll just keep hammering on at it. And then it's like with anything, you just end up, if you look at the whole project from a whole, it seems overwhelming and daunting. You just got to take it one piece at a time. So it's just drilling out one spot weld at a time in order to take the quarter panel off or to get the inner wheelhouse off.
Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of look at it. If you break a project down into sections, it's not as scary, I guess.
There's the old saying, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And I think that applies to car building. If you stand there in the garage and look at all the work you have to do, it's overwhelming. But like you say, breaking it down into tiny pieces, it eventually, tiny piece by tiny piece, you end up with a completed car.
Yeah, and I've stood in the garage just the other night and was looking at all the stuff I had to do on my list, and I was like, there ain't no way any of this is getting done. It's overwhelming, but you just pick up a wrench or whatever you're working on and just start doing something, and but next thing you know, you've completed something and checked it off the list.
So did you get the restoration done before you graduated high school?
No, I didn't quite get it done. I remember I probably painted it. It would have been February, March. My birthday is in March 24th. And on my birthday, me and a buddy of mine were putting the interior in it after assembly and paint. So painted it, first month, or first of March probably when I was 20, right before my 21st birthday. So missed the deadline by a couple of years.
And is that when the 283 went in it?
Yeah, the 283. I had the 283 was actually in it when I painted it. I had all the jam and firewall and frame and everything already done, so the motor was sitting in there.
And that was a pretty special engine too. It wasn't just a regular old 383 that you had laying around the shop. Where did that come from?
So the 283 came from my dad's 57 Chevy Candy. And he bought that when I was probably 2 or 3 years old. And so that kind of was always the cornerstone, the car that I looked up to. And that had a pretty rowdy 283 in it. It was like 12.5 to 1 compression. Had
oh, wow.
a jam in it. And I don't remember many times when it had exhaust on it. So every time it got started, it was always, it was that sound I, heard and felt from that Chevelle kind of. So that might be why I liked that Chevelle and was drawn to it so much, because I'd heard that sound so many other times from my past. Just the open headers on a high compression motor it's something you got to hear in life. But yeah, I remember him and Rick were working on that thing all the time, and I'd be out there hanging out with them, probably getting in the way and messing stuff up, but working till I don't know what time, all hours of the night probably, and my mom would stick her head out the door. He's got to go to bed. It's 10 o'clock. And so I'd have to go inside and go to bed. Well, we lived in a split level, and my room was directly above where the car was. So I'd finally start falling asleep, and then fire it back up, and then it'd let low for a little bit, and then fire it back up. And so I was constantly getting woke up with it. So.
And you ended up with it in your Chevelle, and you kind of further hopped it up, right?
Yeah, it had sat. The Candy had kind of become a shelf in the garage, and it had sat for years. So it had needed to be, the 283 had to be gone through and freshened up, basically. And my dad's like, well, the only way I'm going to give it to you is if we put a different cam in it. We got to deball it a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So put I don't even know, RV cam in it or something. And I got it, and it ran all right, but it wasn't the same motor. And so I drove that thing in there. Oh, I probably didn't put very many miles on it before the oil pump pickup tube fell off.
Oh, no.
And it didn't spin anything, but it had ate the bearings up enough to take the crank out. So it needed a new crank. So at that point, let's see, what did we do? Got the new crank, and re-ringed it, and then got some Dart Iron Eagle 49cc heads with 208 160 valves, which I was told wouldn't work in a 283, but since the 283 was already 60 over, we had the valve to cylinder wall clearance, and put a 600 lift roller cam in it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I figured the compression was probably somewhere around 13.5 to 1.
So
And
by this point, you had convinced your dad that you could handle a real hot rod engine.
yeah, I guess at that point I was moved out, and he didn't get a say what I could do anymore. But yeah, it was the way I looked at it. He'd given me the motor, and it was time for me to make it my own, since I had to put the money in to rebuild it. Because I still have the motor, and I still do love the motor, and it's probably my favorite motor I've ever had.
So you put this really gnarly 283 in the car, and then, I mean, what did you do with it? Was it kind of a weekend cruiser then?
Yeah, it was basically a weekend cruiser. I'd put $100 worth of race fuel in it, drive it a couple laps up and down O Street,
Yeah.
and then be out of gas and have to call it a night damn near. So
Right.
it got really expensive to drive, and with the automatic behind it, I don't know, it wasn't very much fun. The converter was always getting hot on me. So I don't know, probably in 2008, 2010 maybe. I converted it over to E85, did the
Okay.
carburetor swap to an E85 carb, and put a T56 behind it, manual.
Oh yeah.
And converting it to E85 and doing the T56 swap was the best thing I ever did to the carb, because it made it affordable to drive, and a 283 should never be behind an automatic. It just does not make enough torque to work all that.
So it had to have been a pretty high RPM screaming thing with set up like that, right?
Yeah, it didn't wake up till 4,000, probably about 4,000 RPM. It started waking up, and I never found a spot where it quit pulling all the way up to 8,200 RPM, and it was still pulling.
So, I mean, that sounds like a pretty sweet setup. Why did you decide to change over to an LS engine?
Well, if it wasn't for the rod going through the side of the oil pan, I probably would still have it in there. So, and the worst part is the rod let go just cruising. It was 3,000 RPM or whatever. Yeah. And I was actually on my way to the birthday cruise, and just let go. Just started making all the noise. And the night before the birthday cruise, I didn't have any. First year, I didn't have. Birthday cruise is a buddy of ours that has a cruise every year for his birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And all I had to do, I was going to put new mufflers on it and weld my cutouts in and get those wired up. I didn't have anything else to do, so I was like, I'll throw the cutouts on there. And the thing wouldn't start. I lost ignition for some reason. I still don't know if it was a digital 7 or something in the distributor that went bad. So we went to Zach's and picked up just one of his used off-the-shelf HEIs he's had laying around forever. Threw it in there, and the thing fired right up.
Mm-hmm.
And on the way to get E85 and gas it up, and the thing had not ran that good in probably 2 years. It pulled clean, no misses, nothing. You know the saying is the cars always run the best right before they blow up.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And that is, in my case, that's 100% true, because that thing had not ran that good ever. So they let go, and we put it on the trailer and took it back home. The LS has always been kind of intriguing to me, just because it seems like it's pretty good, cheap, easy horsepower and reliability. And I'm kind of getting to the point in life where I want to be able to drive it and not have to worry about it. And I can cruise it anywhere and do stuff like that. So I was going to start doing an LS, and had an LS motor out of an 02 Trans Am, and just was on eBay looking for stuff randomly one day, and saw that these Cadillac CTSV blowers, the takeoffs. I've always wanted a supercharged car. This is perfect. So I bought it, not knowing anything about it or doing any research on whether it would bolt up. I was just like, yeah, LS, it'll work, right?
Right.
Well, the heads are cathedral port on the LS and rectangle on the blower, so it's not a straight swap. Well, I did a bunch of research. A bunch of people said, no, this won't work. There was one guy that was making half-inch thick aluminum adapters to convert it to cathedral port to the rectangle.
Uh-huh.
So I was just figured, oh, he wanted like $425 for them. I was like, kind of seems expensive for a chunk of aluminum, but they were nice CNC machine pieces. And by the time I was ready for it, he was no longer on the internet and nobody could get a hold of him and hadn't heard from him.
Of
Nobody else was
course.
making anything like that. So I kind of had the idea, okay, we can make some adapter plates. So I went down to the local metal store here and bought some 3/4 inch thick pieces of aluminum and figured out what the angle needed to be so they could rest nice on the intake and or on the lifter valley
Mm-hmm.
and fit in there nicely. And I bought a non-ferrous metal blade for my table saw and ran the chunks of aluminum through my table saw and got them cut out to the shape and started drilling them out with my drill press in a Harbor Freight milling vise. It did work. It took I blew an intake gasket after about 6 months the first time around, and then went with an O-ringed intake gasket on the lower half, basically like a 5.3 or LS1 thicker plastic intake gasket with the O-rings in it, and I haven't had an issue with it since.
I love that that's just old school hot rodding, anymore. I mean, those adapters exist now. We sell them. But, back then that was still sort of on the edge of what people were doing. And so, just like hot rodders have been doing for 100 years, you just kind of figured out how to make it work.
Well, yeah, once I got the blower adapter plates and all that stuff working, I was trying to figure out how to get the blower pulley and all the pulley set up to work and all that to line up. And it was mix and matching water pumps and pulleys and brackets and all that stuff. And ended up using getting a Cadillac CTSV harmonic balancer, lower
Mm-hmm.
pulley, and pinning that using a CTSV water pump and machining 3/4 inch off, I believe, off of the factory F body alternator bracket in order to get that to slide back far enough to line up with the CTSV pulley
Okay.
or balancer pulley. Well, what was supposed to be a really easy supercharger swap and all that stuff ended up taking hours and hours and hours of fabricating and trying to line stuff up and get things to be where they're supposed to be.
Do you have any idea what kind of power it makes?
I've never had it on a dyno. I kind of did some loose math with what the LSA makes, per cubic inch versus the 5.7 liter. And then I ported the supercharger snout and ported through the side of that on accident. I had to have Jeff weld up the side of the snout and do all that for me. And then with the BTR stage 3 cam. So I figured if I can make 525, 550, I'd be really happy.
So you have had kind of the unique experience of driving the same car with pretty much the same setup with a very old school hot rodded 283 and a very new school supercharged LS. How do the two compare to each other?
But no, the 283 was, they don't make any torque. It's got a short stroke, so they just don't have the torque. And so you had to wait for the power to come on. But once it did, it felt good and it'd pin you back in the seat. Whereas the LS with that blower, it's 100% instantaneous power. You get all
Yeah.
of it right away.
With that big giant cam and all that compression in that 283, it must have been pretty unruly to drive around on the street, right?
It was a little bit of a pain with the automatic, but I mean, it really wasn't too terrible to drive. I thought it drove actually pretty well. Once it was a stick, you could blurp it a little bit here and there if you needed to.
But the
But
LS, I'm sure, is a lot smoother.
yeah, the LS is a lot smoother. I don't have the LS 100% tuned yet either. There's some down low that needs drivability that needs to be dialed in a little bit, but it is a lot smoother and easier to drive than the 283 in that aspect. But
So you still have now, how long have you had the car?
I believe I got it in '99.
So 22 years, if my math is correct.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't a lot of people who hold on to cars for that long. Why have you kept this one?
It was love at first sight. I don't know. I mean, it was literally the car that, it wasn't exactly the car I dreamed about, but it was as close as a 16, 17-year-old kid's going to get at the time.
You're never going to sell it.
Never going to sell the car. It's I don't know. I love the car. It's become part of me at this point. I've got hours and hours and hours and dollars in it, and time working to get the dollars to put into it. It's just basically become a part of me, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And having had that experience, what would you say to the 14-year-old kid who's shopping around looking for an old car to work on? Do you have any tips that you can say now, 22 years on?
If you have the personality where you give up on stuff, cars are not for you probably, because you're going to run into problems. But there really isn't any problems. There's just more work.
Right.
You blow your motor. Some people could look at it as a problem, or you could look at it as, okay, well, now I got to get to work to fix it. And it's just, you got to stick with it, and you got to take it in small bites. If you tear it all apart and it's apart for 5 years, you're going to have a hard time finishing it. You got to stay focused and get things done as fast as possible, or at least in a timely manner without, hacking it together.
In the time that you've had this car, you've kind of grown up and become a family man, and you own a business. And I mean, you've got a ton of other car projects going on. I mean, where do you find the time to do all of this?
Usually between 9:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. You have to sacrifice family time or work time or sleep, and sleep seems to be the one that I sacrifice more than anything else. My wife might give you a different answer.
Well, there's something to be said for that. There aren't a lot of people who are willing to make that trade. So I guess you just have to love it. Is that what it comes down to?
Yeah, I mean, I really love, I'm a tinkerer by nature. So if we have a weekend off where there's nothing to do, day one, I can kind of sit around and not do anything. But by day two, I'm like fidgety and antsy, and I'm like, I gotta go find something to do. And I'll like start trying to fix the cabinet drawer that's not broken or something. I've got to do something, So I'm always trying to look for something to do, and I have to keep working, and because I'm just a tinkerer and my mind is always going on to the next project or the next item there. So
what comes next? What's the next project?
I've got to get my dad's 57 Candy up and running. It's pretty close to running. It just needs a carb rebuilt on it. The needle and seat stuck. So that should be pretty easy to get that done. And he has a couple cars still that are parked in the shed that need to be fully restored, or they're really solid starts, but they don't look like much. They're all blown apart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 66 Chevelle, and he wants to get that done. So we'll probably start working on that for him so he can get that up and running and going. And then he's got another 57 Chevy back there that he doesn't know about this yet, but I'm going to steal it from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to do all new drivetrain, bushings, brakes, and interior in it, and leave it kind of patinaed.
Mm-hmm.
Got white paint that's checked really bad, and just make it a really nice driver that looks like a survivor car, kind of.
And what about the Chevelle? In another 10 years, are you going to be ready to do something different, or is that going to stay the way it is?
it seems like the 283 lasted about 10 years for me. So I'm hoping the LS will last 10 years before it blows up. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the future will hold. I think right now it's going to get some different tweaks here. I need to redo the rear end in it, so I can get a little more traction, put some stickies on it, and then dial in the brakes a little bit. And otherwise, I think it's going to probably stay the way it is. I'm pretty happy with the way it is right now.
And you have a wife and kids. What do they have a favorite car of yours?
They probably have whatever one they're riding in at the time. I don't know. The kids, the truck technically is my wife's. That was my loophole to build another car.
Yeah.
Because her grandpa had a 72 F100 or whatever, and I was like, when that truck came up for sale, I was like, she's probably not going to know the difference, because I didn't know the difference in the body styles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just assumed she wouldn't either. And when I brought it home on the trailer, first thing she said, "That is not my papa's truck." So it sat in the garage for a year and a half until we started tearing into it. And then I was like, "Honey, here's your Ford. That's your truck." So she drives that. She likes to drive it around to shows and things like that. So, but the kids all probably at the end of the day, they like cruising in the Chevelle because it throws them back in the seat and tickles their stomach or whatever, just the acceleration kind of scares them and startles them.
So are they going to inherit it someday?
That's why I have to build 3 cars. I got 3 kids.
Oh man.
Whoever gets the Chevelle definitely won the lottery on that one.
I saw that Prelude on YouTube. What's that all about?
Yeah, so I kind of just started this YouTube thing a little over a year ago. Well, because we've always talked about doing podcasts in the garage and doing like a garage talk podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all get together and hang out in the garage, and it kind of turns into everybody's talking about what they're working on or work or whatever. So we've always joked that we should just drop a microphone into the garage and record it and put it up on the internet. Well, doing a podcast is apparently a lot more work because you always got to get people together,
right?
Because nobody wants to hear somebody talk to themselves for an hour,
right?
And so I just couldn't ever get anybody together or get anybody to really agree to want to do it. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna try this YouTube thing out, and just for one, I can work on my cars, and it gives me an excuse to get out in the garage and get stuff done. I've gotten more stuff done on my cars in the last year and a half than I have probably in 4 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it forces me to get out there a handful of nights a week.
And that, like podcasting, is probably not as easy as a lot of people think it is, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, I spend a lot of time editing. I mean, for every minute of content you put out on the internet, it probably takes a solid hour's worth of, working on the car, editing, redoing shots that don't quite work out, So it's a lot more energy than I even anticipated it being in the beginning.
And what is the payoff then for you?
That was part of the reason why I kind of started it, was because I thought maybe in a year or so I might be able to get some ad revenue out of it and possibly be able to help support my habit of working on cars.
Right.
And so far that has not worked out, but I still do it. I still enjoy putting stuff out there and making content. I like the editing process. It's not always the funnest to come down here and edit when I'm tired, but sometimes you have to, just to get something out.
Is there something to, obviously you're passionate about cars. Obviously you care that future generations care about cars. Do you see something there where you're kind of helping people to, kind of help continue the hobby?
Yeah, I think that showing people that it's not that difficult necessarily to do stuff. It's kind of scary when you have to think about it, but having resources at your hand, like right now, YouTube is an amazing resource for any car guy. I
Hmm.
mean, I was on it just the other night looking up something to see how to do something just to make sure I was doing it right because I couldn't remember because I hadn't done it for so many years. Um, I think that the more exposure people have to it and the more they can put their eyes on different projects and get their mind flowing about different ways to do stuff, I think the better.
And a technical sort of how-to video is quite a bit different than just like a shop talk, this is what's going on kind of content. Which of the two have you found do you like making the most?
I kind of started, I kind of wanted to do like somewhat of 50-50 with like quote unquote entertainment, shop talk type stuff or tech tips. And I found that my videos that are going over how to do stuff and help people out with tech type stuff, those are the ones outperform my quote unquote me working on my project and giving updates,
Mhm.
entertainment type ones. So I think that a lot of people are using the YouTube for the information and learning how to do stuff.
And what's your channel called?
Full throttle performance speed shop.
In just a minute, we'll hear from Nick and Jason about what it takes to build a cool traditional hot rod at home, then drive the wheels off of it on the highway and the drag strip. But first, to see photos of Mike's Chevelle and Nick and Jason's Model A's, visit the Toolbox, our automotive blog. Find it at speedwaymotors.com and click the Toolbox link on the front page. We'll also post a few pictures to Facebook and Instagram. New episodes of What Moves You come out every 2 weeks on Tuesdays, and if you like what you hear, tell a friend to listen to What Moves You on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. What did your Model A look like when you got it? Like, what did you start with?
It was just a original Ford Roadster body, and it was in Sioux City. A guy named Joe Russell told me about it. We were at the Fremont swap meet, and we were talking about kind of future projects, and he mentioned it, and so he passed the guy's number to me, and we kind of made a deal. And I mean, that was probably 2009, I think. It's been a while, and borrowed some money and went up and got it, and then started collecting parts. So it was just kind of body on a stock Model A frame, just on bare wheels, no tires, and enough to roll it around. And stock had the original engine, but not much else.
And is that what you wanted, a 28, 29 Roadster?
Yep.
Like, that's what you were looking for?
Yep.
And Jason, you didn't start with much, right?
I mean, the first haul was a lot, but it all came from the same guy up in Yankton, South Dakota. Buddy's dad had it, and a tree had fallen on it, so he lost interest, and he had a bunch of spare parts to go with it. So it was rough, but there was a lot of parts that came with it.
And so how long did it take you, Nick, how long did it take you to build yours?
Well, I guess I don't know, collecting parts I wouldn't count as building. So actual time, probably a couple of years. It was here and there. There was a time where it sat for probably 6 months and I didn't even touch it. I mean, I think it happens to a lot of people. Joe, you know how it goes, and life happens. And but probably a couple of years. But it's weird too. That was to get it just on the road, and then you have different periods of time where you work on it to improve it or make changes.
Yeah. Well, you drove it around in bare metal for a while, right?
Before for a year, and then Jason and I and my dad, another friend or two, did some body work, and then he shot primer. It was the next spring or next winter for the next stage, I guess.
Yeah. What would you say, I mean, other than just life happening, what would you say was the hardest thing that you encountered while you were building it?
Well, I mean, so I'd never done something like that before, and it was really figuring out how to piece things together and how to do things. I hadn't done much welding before that, so just figuring some of that out and fabricating anything from the substructure of it to fit it on 32 frame to the floor and some of the pieces for the doors. Kind of, to me, there was some mental blocks,
Yeah. And that's something that like I like to ask these guys, if we have on the podcast, we have like an accomplished builder, ask them what are your tips for somebody who's just starting out? And almost without fail, they say, just do it. Just pick up the thing and just do it, because that's the only way you're going to learn how to do it. And I kind of, followed your build as you were building it. And that's what you did. You're like, I don't know how to, build this thing, but I'm just going to build it. And it came out really great. It's not like the end result shows that you were learning as you go. It came out, to me, it came out really great.
Maybe it's going to take 2 or 3 times, because that's, I think maybe what people don't see too is that, oh, it's, social media or whatever, here's a picture and it's done, but there's the 2 or 3 times that you threw away that they don't see.
Right. How about you, Jason? What was the hardest thing with your car?
Money.
Yeah.
And really it was pretty easy budget, but still I had other stuff going on and switching jobs and, wasting time on girls and stuff like that. But, cause it was the money thing. Figuring out a path to go, if I wanted it on a Model A chassis or how I want it to be built, or foreseen to where it is now, I needed to start thinking back then of where, because this is my vision of what I wanted now. But back when I was first driving it for the first few years, it was cool to me, but it wasn't my final result of what I wanted.
What did it feel like to the first time you like fired it up and drove it around the block? Do you remember that feeling?
Yeah, I remember it. My dad was over. I didn't have the rear brake lines done, so I screwed a fitting into the master cylinder and pinched it off with vice grips. I didn't even have the wheel bearings packed. I don't even know if there was rear end grease in it. And it fired right up, broke in the engine. And I'm like, I'm going around the block. I don't care. And it was, we went around the block a couple times, and it was really cool, and, just doing that stuff with my dad's cool. And, so yeah, I remember it. It was pretty awesome.
Nick, how about you?
Well, so I'll add to Jason's. I remember riding, I think he and his dad went around the block, then I hopped in and went for a spin with him, and just how loud it was. It was so awesome. And that was probably, I don't know, I'm guessing May of 2012. And I wasn't that far with mine yet. And so it really gave me the big push to get, I wanted to drive it to Bonneville that year, and we went down to, at the end of July, down to Salina, Kansas for the KKOA show. It was super hot, but that was the first trip that we both took. I know he took his to Good Guys Des Moines that year. Mm-hmm. And so I remember, it's funny, I just looked it up today, the video of, again, Jason and his dad were at my house, and they helped get it running and went around the block, and it was, the best thing ever, just definitely like all that time spent, and then you finally get to drive it, and then you still, of course, have a lot to do to get it on the road and somewhat safe and reliable. But it's, you can't wipe the smile off for a week.
I mean, and you kind of finished yours up and then hit the road like right away, right? Like you went to that KKOA show very shortly after getting it running.
Yeah, I think it was a week or two after we got it running. We ran down there, and then I had 2 weeks between that and when we left for like a week and a half before leaving for Bonneville, and I had a long list of things to fix to make that trip, but it did it.
So in the first 2 months that your car was done, you put on thousands of miles.
It was like 5,000 miles because we did, Salina and then out to Bonneville and back. And my Uncle John rode with me. He's like, I don't know, 6'4", 250, 275, and I'm not that big of a guy. And so he's next to me in the Roadster with his head above the windshield, and away we go to Bonneville. He rode with me, but and then we got back, and the next weekend we ran down to the ham drags, or maybe it was 2 weeks later. I don't remember. I think it was the next weekend. And I think we both raced our cars at the Ham Drags that year, just on street tires, and things have kind of evolved since then.
I mean, there are lots of guys who just tiptoe into things like, I'm going to get this thing running, and then maybe the first year, maybe I'll take it, to the car show that's an hour away. But you guys were like, just hit the ground running.
Yeah. Hey, why not?
Makes it around the block. It should make it anywhere. I mean,
right. Well, and the thing is, traveling, running around in a small groups, there's always, you have help if something goes wrong, or if I need to call AAA, if it's that bad, then it is what it is. So,
Nick, why did you want a Roadster? Of all of the, and like, I guess when I met you, you had that Galaxy. So like, how did you end up then with a Model A Roadster over any of the other things that you could end up with?
So growing up, I was more exposed to the 60s Fords, maybe mid-late 50s. And so that's kind of what I knew and what I was comfortable with. Moving to Omaha, met a bunch of people like Dave Scheinman. He and his dad, they're the ones that really made the hot rod thing seem attainable to me, because they were doing this stuff all the time in their garage at home. Mm-hmm. And so that's what got me interested in, start reading online or in magazines, or join on the Ham, where there are a lot of people would kind of post how to and build their own cars, and realize that, I could do this too. Then you look at the different hot rods and what you can afford. Like, of course, the 32 was way out of the question for me, but and ran across. I think it helped that, that's what I wanted. But then there was one up local within 100 miles to go pick up too.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, you kind of had this vision of like a mean 60s drag coupe in your head from the beginning, right?
The 554
and it had to be a coupe.
Jimmy White's coupe. I mean, all those DW down in Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
The 60s drag coupes are awesome. It was the best drag racing ever. It's just cool, and it's a bit much to maintain to drive on the street, but it's fun.
You could have made things way easier on yourselves by running a more common engine. Yeah, I guess, Nick, you're kind of, a 347 Ford is relatively common, but a small block Chevy would have been easier and cheaper. Why did it have to be a Ford?
Visually, I think they're an attractive engine. Small block Fords aren't really attractive visually. And I have an open hood car, so and I mean, we ran dirt track for years, and I know a small block Chevy just as good as anything, but they're boring. They don't sound good to me, and I'm just a Ford guy, so it's Ford or nothing for me. Except for the one I have going together now.
And I grew up around the Ford stuff too. And, first thing I remember riding I was really young, my dad's 64 Mercury Comet. It was a 289, and that just, I don't know, it just stuck with me. So small block Ford it is. And it's worked out. I picked up the engine that's in there used, and now it's abused, and it still does its thing. But
and why, again, make the choices that you made to end up where you are, why traditional style cars? A car that you plan to drive and cover distance in, anything would be more comfortable than the cars that you built. What is it about a traditional 50s, 60s style car that sucks you in and made you want to build one?
It's never going to go out of style. It has that look that people use the word timeless, I think, quite a bit, quite often. And it's never going to go out of style. I don't need to worry about the latest wheels or graphics or whatever. And it's always going to me, it's always going to be pretty cool. So it really was attractive to me, and that's the direction I went.
Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
He pretty much hit it there. I mean, yeah, they're just neat. They're, I went to Good Guys this past weekend, and been going for 20 plus years straight, and you see the same car and it's had 4 different sets of wheels on it, or 2 different paint jobs, and it looks good today, but what's it going to look like 2 years from now? And you have to redo it and this and that, and just, I can't say much. My car doesn't have paint, so. But it's the timeless thing.
We had mentioned you guys had kind of owned cool cars before. Nick, when I met you, you had that Galaxy that was sort of your trademark for a long time. Are these like forever cars for you guys?
Mine is. I think whether I want to keep it or not, it's gonna stay with me. Yeah, it's there'll be some more other cars, but not this one won't go away.
I don't think anyone would want mine. They might want to ride in it and then never again. But
yeah,
I don't know. Mine's pretty personal. I got some. I mean, feels good to get it finished, or to where it's at now, and it ain't gonna go nowhere. My other cars could go down the road, but not that one.
So, I mean, we've talked about you guys drive these things hard. You know, you drive them around town, you drive them on long trips, you drive them to the drag strip, and then drive them home. I mean, you break them and then you fix them. Like, that kind of takes some discipline, right?
Yeah, when we were running hard and it was every weekend back to back, we were doing something. Yeah, we got home Sunday afternoon and we tear them apart. I mean, just so we can order parts on Monday, and we're leaving Friday, so we got to get them done. So Nick has a clutch story from down in Joplin.
Yeah, and you've got broken axles
and
broken axle tube even on one trip.
Yeah, that was the drag.
It was it was I don't know if you at the time maybe it wasn't very much fun, but it was just kind of that drive to make it to the next event or the next race. And yeah, the clutch blew out of the Roadster down at the ham drags, and that was even just on street tires, not on slicks. And the next weekend I was planning to take it up to the Black Hills, so had somebody tow it home overnight on Saturday, and then Sunday we tore it apart, threw a clutch in it, I think maybe the next day, and it was back together, within 48 hours probably, and ready to go for the next weekend. So
how did the Hot Rods of Omaha get started? I mean, first of all, I guess describe what it is, and then talk about how it came to be.
Well, I think it really just started as a hashtag on social media. It's a good way to group the cars of Omaha together that really you could consider a hot rod, and it could, it doesn't have to be a Model A or a 32. It could be some hot Mustang or something, but.
Mm-hmm.
It really did just start as a hashtag, and now it's kind of, I don't know, it's not a club, but it's morphed into a kind of a inclusive environment that people identify and they just kind of know of it. And, you don't have to be recruited or any of that BS,
I mean, Omaha, Nebraska isn't maybe what people anywhere else would see as being like a hotbed of traditional hot rodding, but I mean, it kind of is, right?
Yeah, surprisingly enough, I guess I wouldn't have I moved here maybe 20 years ago and I wouldn't have known that, but you start to meet people and realize that there is more than you would think as far as hot rods go around Omaha. And I'm sure, that's the thing too, where there's other cities and towns in the US where there's probably a lot more of it going on than what you even realize.
I heard you, Nick, say one time a long time ago that all it takes is one guy with a car, and then everybody sort of sees it and wants to build their own, and then it sort of spreads. Is that kind of what happened in the Omaha scene?
I don't know, Jason. What do you think?
Well, you mentioned Shyman and them; they all had them, and Gary Anderson. They always had cool cars, and in my situation, I never thought it was attainable because it was just my situation. And then things started going better. And I said, I think I can do this. We can go back to Nick's Galaxy. And I never thought I'd get a Galaxy. And then somebody hit me up. He's like, hey, I know this old lady that's got the husband died. True story. There's a 63 Galaxy in the garage. You interested? I'm like, well, why not? I'll take a look at it. Ended up being a Tri-Power FE car and super solid. And I got that. And my dad and I built it, it's father-son thing. And we drove that forever. And so, the whole seeing someone else with the car, and, that does help a lot. I mean, it's, we'll go to cruise night tonight. And I don't know what car, I'll probably take my coupe tonight. And, the kids, they just run over to it. I get out as fast as I can and walk away because that's the way I am. But the kids, they love it, and everyone just goes over there and looks at it in awe. And, it feels good, but it's hopefully they take something from it and think they can do it and do it themselves,
That is a good point to kind of go back to maybe impressionable is a good word for whether it's kids or even when we were younger. And you start meeting people. I started going to cruise nights here in probably 2000 when I moved to the area, and it was at Flashbacks near 84th and Center. And that's where I did, I met Gary Anderson and Jeff Patchen, and there were a few others, the Shymans and a few others that were around. And you start realizing, they have these cars and the attainable part of it, which I didn't think at the time. It just takes a while to realize that, it is. And then even like the Galaxy stuff, that's how I met Jason. And there's a bunch of friends that I could say 90% of my friends here in Omaha I've met because of cars. Mm-hmm. And now, I'd call them lifelong friends. And so, you could say one person or a few people, and start talking to them and start asking questions, and all of a sudden you have your own old car that you're driving around.
How long have they been on the road now?
2012? I think they both hit the road that year.
So almost 10 years. How many miles are on them?
We both drive them a lot in town. I know I got to be over 40,000. I mean,
yeah.
Quick counting, my speedometer never. It's funny. You look at these cars. One thing that I know on mine that needs work is the wiring. It really never got finished. So that means the speedometer has never worked in that car. Mm-hmm. But calculating, adding up these trips and then running around town or, over to Lincoln for Speedway Cars and Coffee or other trip, over to Des Moines or up to Sioux City or just, down to Joplin, Missouri. We've been to Texas in those cars, I think 3 times. We ran out to Baltimore, Maryland for the Writers Journal Revival. Mm-hmm. That was in, I think, 2013. That was, I don't know how many, it was 3,500 miles, I think. But, so I'm guessing 55 to 60,000 on mine. And it shows it. I mean, there's things I've had to fix and replace, and, it's how it works.
Right. So is that trip to Baltimore, is that the longest trip you've taken?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, definitely for me, yeah.
Yeah.
We were on our way to Bonneville one year, and it got rained out. We turned around in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of 6-hour trips, a lot of 6-hour trips, or however many miles that is, 500-mile trips. But yeah, Baltimore was a long, long ways over there.
How do you, it's not like getting in a Honda Civic and pointing the nose to the horizon. How do you prepare your cars for a long trip like that?
Credit card. Take a credit card with you. Trust yourself and your ability of your work, and trust your machine, and go.
So I'd say one of the big things I've learned from Jason and his dad is before one of those road trips, car goes up on jack stands, nut and bolt things, your suspension, check your brakes, master cylinder, brake fluid, stuff like that, change the oil, tires, wheel bearings, steering, throw, have little tool bag, maybe small spare parts. If you got room for a tire tube or 2, since we always have different size tires front and rear, hit the road.
Do you ever, mid 3,500 mile road trip, wish that you had built something that was a little more civilized? Like, do you ever think, man, when I get home, I'm gonna I'm gonna buy a 63 Galaxy with air conditioning and air coilovers or whatever?
I don't mind it. The cars aren't that bad. The 100-degree days, mine's like a baked potato, but it's so fun to drive. And it's awesome. No, because when there's chance of rain and you head out on the road anyway, that's a little different story, we had to dodge some storms a couple times and just wait and this and that. But Yeah,
And you're in a bare metal car that runs slicks on the street all the time, right? I mean, it's a little different for you than it might be for most people.
Yeah, when you say civilized, my car actually is, for street manners, it's very civilized, and just the no top is definitely a thing. And I'll admit that getting a little bit older, the sun and the heat get to me more than it used to. So it's time definitely to have a standby vehicle that has a roof and some more comfort. Like I know Jason's got a couple other cars that provide that level of comfort.
Yes,
but
no air conditioning yet. But
in all of those miles, you have surely had some sketchy moments. What can you remember the worst where you're like, oh, sheesh, like in touch with your mortality?
Is that the tornado by Nebraska City?
Oh, you can tell that story. I got one that was on your birthday 2 or 3 years ago.
So we ran down. It would have been right around the time you kind of.
About 6 years ago.
You were done with it's when you started your own shop, was right after that.
Right, real shortly after that. I left a unapproved day off.
Yep, down to Topeka. And I think maybe I ran down the night before, and we just wanted to meet up with Drag Week. We knew some people that were running their cars and had to go see it because that's about as close as it gets here. And did that. And then so on the way home the next day, we were near Nebraska City, and there was a bad storm rolling through, and we ended up, again, his car bare metal and mine no top, and it was just downpouring where we couldn't see. We got under an overpass on the interstate on I-29 and ran up, up the hill under the bridge, and there was a tornado in the area. We weren't directly in the middle of it, but we were pretty close to it.
It wasn't far.
Scary.
We saw all the damaged crops, and it was
right.
Oh man!
And stuff kind of blowing through underneath the bridge, and that'd be my story. Jason's got another one, I think.
We had a crazy pop-up. My life pretty much revolves around cars, but Thursday nights we can call it date night or whatever. But I kind of put the wrenches down and just do something other than cars most of the time. So we went out for dinner, and not a cloud in the sky. It's supposed to be a beautiful night, and then these storms just popped up out of nowhere. It was actually the day before we're leaving for Des Moines, probably 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And these storms popped up, and my neighbor called. The bars where we were eating is probably 15 miles away. My neighbor calls, and she says, our neighborhood just got destroyed with softball-sized hail. And I probably had 5 or 6 customer cars sitting outside, and I was like, holy crap, so I got to go home. Well, I'm not going to drive in it, so we're waiting. Then another storm pops up, and we're on the interstate, and I hit a bridge joint, and it lifted the back of the car. I'm on slicks at this point, and it's downpouring rain, and this lightened the back of the car, and it started going around, and I looped it twice on the interstate, and luckily I didn't hit the guardrail. It came close, but I kept it running, and you race go-karts or cars enough that you kind of have your wits about you, and you try to drive away from the guardrail when you have the chance as you're spinning. I think that's what kept it off of there. That's what I tell myself anyways. But that one, it scared my girl pretty bad. And it frightened me. It was, that could have been real bad. These things aren't made to crash.
Yeah. And you, speaking of sketchy moments, you drag race your cars regularly. It's not just I took it to the drag strip once and I got the timing slip to show that I did it. What's the fastest, Nick, your car's been?
It was down at the Ham Drags. I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. 5 years ago, it ran on 11. I think it was 1197 at 115 miles an hour, and that's the best I've run. That's the only 11-second pass I've had, and I'm not as hard on it as I could be. It was like a 160 60-foot time, and otherwise I kind of take it easy on it. I haven't broken much besides that clutch.
And Jason, your car does what, 10s, right?
10s. I think my best is either a 1089 or 1087. and 131 miles an hour.
To those of us who have never done a, fast drag strip pass in a like early hot rod, like what does that feel like? Like, what did it feel like the first time that you did it? Where you're like, oh man, like this is where it ends for me, or did it all just feel good and feel like it was supposed to?
Well, so our cars are very different. Jason will have I think, a much different take. My car is pretty easy to drive, but it's still a huge adrenaline rush. It's fairly quick, and there's no roof. It's got a little roll bar. His car, he'll have to explain his car.
Stopping, it's the worst part. When you get a car going 130 miles an hour, I mean, we watch Drag Week, we watch all that stuff, and you see these Mustangs running 8s like it's nothing. My car, it's a transverse leaf rear spring, and it's got basically Hurst Earhart brakes up front, little spindle mount brakes, and it takes a lot to woe it down. And luckily, where we race quarter mile has a really good runoff. Joplin's got a fairly decent runoff. I-29 just south of here, where we race 8th mile, that's pretty short. I'm going in the 8th. I'm going over 100, and there's been a couple times where I was like, oh boy, crank the wheel to the left and hope it goes. Get it
downshifted if you can.
Downshifted, yeah, and it's but downshifting can be dangerous too. You start that wheel hop and then you don't know what's going to happen, and so engine braking works so good, but you got to ease off the throttle a little bit, if you're going real fast. So getting mine slowed down. I had one scare down in Joplin one year. I shifted in a second, it pulled the front tires off the ground again, and it shot me right towards the wall. That was pretty sketchy. But other than that, just getting it slowed down. I mean, it's fun to go fast. I mean, you don't think about the consequences until because I mean, being a race car, growing up around race car stuff, you gotta put those wrecks you see on TV and all those videos, because the fans love that stuff, but I can put it out of my mind. I could watch those videos right up to when I put my helmet on, and then it just goes away. And I got shift points, and I just got to remember what I got to do. And, zone out, and just getting the thing stopped is scary.
When you look back on the time, either building or since the cars have been done, can you pinpoint like a favorite memory? Like this is the thing that I think of when I think of this car.
That's a tough one. We've had a lot of fun in those cars. I can't pick out that Baltimore road trip. It was just the two of us on a lot of that trip. We met some guys in was it Ohio or Michigan? And ran with them out there. But on the way back, it was just our two cars, and that was a lot of fun. We were, in Pennsylvania, rolling through the mountains at 100 miles an hour. It was pretty awesome.
Our way back from the rained out Bonneville trip, the grasslands of Colorado.
Yeah.
I don't know how fast we were going, but we were going well over 110, 115 it was a long time. I mean, it was 15 minutes.
Right. So I remember on my GPS, we were going 114, and it stayed right at that number for, like you say, about 15 minutes or straight.
That was pretty wild. I remember that all the time. Getting a 10-second pass is really cool on a transverse leaf car. I mean, I worked pretty hard to get the blower motor that's in it together and done. That's a lot of money, and a lot of people would call me stupid, but I mean, I'd take that motor across the country right now, and I have. I've driven it to Dallas or Austin, and I'd drive it anywhere.
Yeah.
The only thing I got to take with me is front tires. So, but I drive it anywhere.
I think it's tough I don't know, what do I really like is you walk out to the garage and there it is. And then there are all those memories that kind of come back, or you just take it for a spin and remember, you're like, oh, this strip or that moment, or, that pass at the drag strip, or, one other one that sticks out is we did a no prep drags at our local I-29 track. again, I don't know, that's 4 or 5 years ago, I bet. Maybe 6, it was 2016, I think. But it was one of those where you're in the stick shift class, so you could get lined up. I was lined up next to a Honda Civic.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some of those that we've both, one of them, I made it through 5 rounds, and I was maybe, I don't know, 3rd or 4th by the time the night was done, which shouldn't happen. And then I know there's been a different one, maybe Jason went a long ways, and it's really surprising. Like, you catch people off guard, they see it's just an old, Model A, and but they can actually, like, keep up and hold their own.
Jason, I feel like you have to tell the story of running it at the autocross at the Good Guys event in Lincoln. That you won the event, right?
I did win the event. There was the first run I went out, hitting it hard. Everything went good. So for about halfway, started getting a bunch of smoke from under the dash. It had broke the battery mount, and it was arcing on the cowl top, and because my battery's behind my gauges or behind the dash where a Model A tank would be. And I remember the announcer, he's like, "Oh, I think he ran out of gas." He's pointing at the cowl. And then, no, he pushed it off, and I ratchet strapped it down and went out again. And I think it was the hot rod class or whatever I won. And it was second place was that really nice black. It's been around forever. That I think it was a 38 Chevy that Del Besh built.
Yeah, black car. Yeah,
he got second place. So I mean, it was cool to beat that.
Well, and I mean that's like a big. Yeah, that's like a pro touring style car. I mean, 18-inch, 19-inch wheels and
Corvette
fat tires and an LS, and and you beat him on bias plies with a straight axle front and back and a FE.
Yep. Tri-power to boot. It doesn't like getting on and off the gas. It just likes going.
We talked about these young guys who kind of see the cars at shows, and I was certainly one of them where I'd see a car like yours, and it's not so over the top. It kind of seems like it's an attainable thing. And then you see this clapped out Model A body in the field, and you think, I can do that. But it's always harder than you think it's going to be. What advice, if you were going to give advice to that kid who's all lit up on building a hot rod and sees that clapped out body in the field, what advice would you give them before they got started?
Knowing what I know now, or going through what I went through, I mean, I didn't. My car, if you really get looking at it, it's still kind of rough. I wish I would have started with a nicer body because you get a nicer product. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just you start with something beat up. It takes a lot to get it back. A lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of extra tools that, it's great to have the tools because you're always going to have them. But I was fortunate I already had them. So I don't know. I tell them to try it. I mean, there's a lot of ambitious people that still want to save something, but from a clapped out Model A for $1,500 to a super nice one for $5,500, I'd probably save up and buy the one for $5,500. But on a 32, a car that's worth saving,
yeah.
If you can get a 32 for cheap or a 33, 34, it's worth putting the time and money into to get it right. So,
yeah. So just to add to that, I'd say don't give up, because I know when I was working on my Roadster, and there were a few times where I about threw the towel in and sent it down, put it up for sale and send it down the road. But I finally just had to step away for a little bit and rethink it and jump right back in feet first. And so the big thing, don't give up, because put the time in and figure things out, ask questions from other people that have done it, and you'll make it happen.
Thanks to Mike Earley, Jason Holland, and Nick Hazing for being our guests today. And thanks to all of you for listening to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast. To see photos and watch video we referenced in today's episode, visit the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com. Email the podcast at podcast@speedwaymotors.com. And if you like what you heard, tell a friend where to find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.